What is up, fam? It's your boy Paul P. Henny, and this is the One Day at a Time podcast. That's right, we are in this together, fam. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, give a rating, and share this podcast wherever you see fit. You know what? Somebody might be able to use or get something from what you're seeing and hearing today. All right, fam, we are going to jump right into this topic, which is actually a fairly sensitive part of my life. We're going to talk about how I overcame suicide and rage. We're going to talk about overcoming suicide and rage, and I'm going to share it from my perspective. Okay, from my perspective, I'm going to share my story. I only have my story to tell. But hopefully I'm able to encourage you if you're dealing with it, or perhaps you know someone that might be dealing with either of these. And I'm going to start with a thought. And this thought is one that has helped me over the years. And that is simply this: your life has value. Your life has a purpose. Your life has value. Your life has a purpose. And fam, that's part of the foundation of how I actually overcame was beginning to accept these facts, these truths about my life. Okay. Now I'm going to take you back to 2007 when I was running track and fields my senior year at VCU. And I remember prior to practice getting into an argument, or let's just say a heated discussion with a friend. And I remember leaving that conversation and just dealing with such frustration. And I recall running to the track. We would run to the track as a part of our warm up. It was about a mile and a half warm up. And I remember running to the track. And as I'm running down the road, because where my track was in a city, there was a tractor trailer coming my way. And I heard this unfamiliar voice, fam, that says, "Nobody cares about you. You can end it now." And the thought was to run in front of this truck. I had never dealt with anything that intense before. I remember being so shaken up because that thought, that feeling was so tense. And I said, I'm going to do whatever I can. I knew a few Bible verses. I said those Bible verses and I said, Paul, just get to the track. Just get to the track. Because I didn't want to end it there. But the reality is, fam, that's literally what I was feeling. And then what I did was, rather than running home, I caught a ride home because I had never experienced a feeling like that. And for the next few months, I dealt with it off and on. And typically it was around, perhaps hearing something about myself that I didn't like, that would trigger perhaps thoughts of rejection. I remember later that summer, I called it was something else had happened, and I had just gotten into another argument, and something was said to me that I didn't appreciate. And it was almost like it was highlighting areas of my life, highlighting weaknesses of my life, if you will. And all of a sudden I had that urge again to just end it all. And I called my mom and I told her, because by this time she knew. And she said, "Paul, where is this coming from?" So we talked and we actually ended up back in my childhood. You see, my parents have 6 sons. I'm the second of 6 boys, right? And my older brother, man, this guy was sharp. He still is sharp. And I look up to him to this day. I admire him. But the reality is, growing up was kind of challenging because he's only a year older than me, okay? And I mean, in elementary school, this guy was making straight A's. He was winning every award. I remember when he graduated in 5th grade, he won like every single award. And I'm right after him, okay? And I wasn't necessarily the sharpest tack in the drawer, if you will. I remember that there was one time I made straight A's and you couldn't tell a brother nothing because I finally felt like I was living up to something that my older brother did for that one time, right? For that one time. He was also a great athlete. He played on the AAU basketball team. That before travel basketball was huge, and before everybody and their mama had a team. He played on a very exclusive team. As a matter of fact, when he was in middle school, his team finished second place in the country. Second place in the country. And then it was almost like every year they would go to nationals and they would always finish in the top 5, top 10, top 15. And it was amazing. And while I loved following him around and while there was so much pride in seeing my brother accomplish these things, the reality was I was only a year younger than him. I will never forget at his graduation party. He played basketball all throughout high school, and he ended up getting a full scholarship to the Naval Academy. And we were all so proud of him. He has this full ride to the Naval Academy, which would eventually lead to him being an officer in the Navy. But my dad said something at his graduation party that really had a big impact on me. My dad said, "My son has a full ride to the Naval Academy, and I'm not paying for him to go to college, and I don't plan on paying for any of my boys to go to college." Now, fam, I was graduating the next year, and I was kind of struggling with hearing that, okay? Because the reality was, yes, I was running track at that time, and yes, we had done pretty well by this time, but I wasn't having any colleges knocking on my door. I just wasn't having any of that. As a matter of fact, I looked at my brothers and I said, well, the younger ones, if you will, and I said, "Don't worry, y'all, I got it. I'm going to lower this bar just a little bit, okay? We going to be all right, okay? We going to be all right." But the reality was, fam, even though I was so proud of him, and I still am, I dealt with that personally. It wasn't anything that he ever said or did. As a matter of fact, he was never boastful. He never bragged about it. He's still an officer in the Navy to this day. He's had a very good career, and I'm so proud of him. But the reality is, if you want to know what he does, it's kind of like pulling teeth to give info out of him because he's just not that type of guy. He doesn't brag. He doesn't boast. He's not the type that puts his info on Front Street. He just goes about, puts his head down, and he gets to work, and he does an excellent job. And I still look up to him to this day for that. But the reality is, I was dealing with that. So any sense of rejection that I may have felt had nothing to do with what he said. It was something in here. It was a manifestation of something that I was dealing with where I felt like I wasn't good enough. I felt like I wasn't good enough, fam. So anytime I got to a place where somebody was saying something negative to me, really what it was doing, it wasn't as much of what they may have said. It was more so how I took it because of what I was dealing with on the inside. It was me, fam. So if somebody were to say something that lended itself to rejection, I would deal with it in a pretty rough way. And so it was suicide at one point, and sometimes, quite honestly, it would just be rage. I'll be honest with you, by the time I graduated college, if you walked into my dorm room or my apartment, my door was broken. I had 2 holes in my closet door because I didn't know how to deal with the frustration that I dealt with from whatever rejection that I was feeling. But here's the thing, fam. At that time, my life still had value. My life still had purpose. I just had a hard time seeing it. Okay? So I'm talking with my mom through these things we go through, what I dealt with, the feelings that I dealt with my older brother that he never put on me. It was something that I dealt with. We talk about what happened with my dad and and whatever he said, and he's just saying that as a dad not wanting to pay for college. But for me, it was like I felt like I was letting my parents down. As a matter of fact, my freshman year, we actually had a track meet. My first track meet was at the Naval Academy, and my second track meet was at the Naval Academy. But here's the thing, the second one was after Christmas break. And we had a little trouble, covering the expenses from the first semester. And fam, I'll be honest with you, I wasn't able to run at that second track meet that happened to be at the Naval Academy, which is where my brother was in school. So what did it do? That sense of rejection that I felt, all of a sudden it came up again. And over the course of time, I would just continue to deal with it until getting to the point where I just wanted to end it all. I didn't realize the impact that me dealing with suicidal thoughts would have on my community. I ended up telling a couple of friends outside of my parents, and I remember a really good friend of mine, and we would go to college basketball games together all the time. We were from the same hometown, and that was my homie, right? And I remember she texted me one day. I was at my internship, and she texted me, and I'm like, okay, I'm thinking we're catching up about something, and she basically told me how much I meant to her as a friend, as a brother. And it meant a lot to me. And I think when she sent that text to me, just, as a friend, she was my sister in Christ. We went to the same Bible studies together, basketball games, all sorts of things, just hanging out, just as college friends. And what it did was crystallize the fact that not only did my life have purpose and value, but it crystallized the fact that my life meant something to others. And at the time, I had a hard time seeing that because of what I was inwardly dealing with. So what my mom did was she prayed. She ended up praying a prayer with me after we uncovered these things. And I can't even remember exactly what she said during the prayer. All I remember was that conversation uncovered so many lies that I had begun to believe. And it released the truth. It uncovered the truth, if you will, that my life has purpose. My life has value. There are people out there that love me. And more importantly, there's a God who loved me. So if we fast forward a little bit, that was the end of me dealing with suicide. Just coming to this belief and coming to this understanding of the value that my life held. And I'm so grateful to my mom to this day for helping me through that situation. Because I'll be honest, it got quite scary at times. It really did, for me and for those who were around me. If we fast forward a little bit, a few years later, I ended up getting married, and the suicidal thoughts ended up leaving. After a while, it ended up actually turning into rage, or that rage that I mentioned before. Putting holes in my college room door, which I'm not proud of at all. Okay, that rage was dormant for a while, but when I got married, it was almost like it began to pop back up. You see, rage is defined as a violent and uncontrolled anger. And fam, I was dealing with that. And whether it was an argument that led to some form of road rage, which, unfortunately I dealt with from time to time, or it was an argument that led to a broken coffee table. And, these aren't things that I'm proud of, but the reality is that this is my story. This is my story. I remember it was a specific moment where my wife and I were going through, and I got to that point, fam, and I was dealing with rage. And by this time, we had our oldest son. He's a middle schooler now. He's a middle schooler, but at the time he was. I think he may have been a toddler around this point. And I remember my wife holding him And they had this look of fear and uncertainty. And I remember like just coming to my senses and being like Paul, what are you doing? Like what are you doing? And I ended up leaving and just I had this loop that I would drive. It was like a 45-minute loop to just kind of clear my mind. And the whole time I'm just thinking like, man, what are you doing, Paul? What are you doing? And I would talk with my oldest son PJ about this from time to time because he still remembers. He still remembers what happened. And I'm glad to say that he has seen me overcome this, right? He has seen me overcome it. Unfortunately, that time wasn't the last time. I remember, a few years later, I had been doing a little better for a while, but I remember my wife and I getting into this argument, and at this time she was in some therapy about some other things, and it was going really well for her, right? It was going really well for her. But at this point, I don't even remember exactly what happened. All I remember is that we were in another argument, right? We were in another argument. Now, to kind of paint the picture, we live in this community where a lot of our neighbors were older. Okay, so we were actually kind of like the community show, not necessarily because of bad things that were constantly happening, but it was almost like, hey, this is the young family. They are our form of entertainment. Mostly good entertainment. They loved us. They loved our boys. But every once in a while, if I found myself, just being in a bad spot, I guess they would see that too. It's kind of embarrassing, when you really think about it. But here's the thing: it's real. It's real. It's true. And I remember being in this particular situation. My wife and I, we were in this argument. We were in this discussion, and I got so mad that I took my fist and I broke a mirror. And my hand was bleeding. And it wasn't fun. As a matter of fact, everybody in the house at the time was nervous. I remember Kiara taking our boys and she packed them in the car and they left. And I was there. I was left there to deal with my own issues by myself. I ended up leaving and I got in my car and I drove and I called a friend of mine and he helped walk me off of this mountain of rage. And I'll never forget it. And I'm forever grateful to him for helping me to understand what it was. At first I was saying it was anger, but the more I thought about it, no fam, it was rage. And I had to be real with myself. I ended up meeting with my pastor as well, and he said something that I will never forget. He says, Paul, I'm glad that we got to this point now. I'm glad that you just shared with me what you're going through. He said, but here's what I know. We won't really know how much you've grown from this until you're in a similar situation. How will you react? I'll never forget that, fam. Because it was almost like he's presenting this challenge in front of me. Pastor Travis, man. And if you're watching, I really appreciate you because that crystallized it for me. I can tell you that I've grown. I can tell you that I've learned from this. But the reality is I won't know until I'm in a similar situation. And I choose to respond differently. The next few days were pretty quiet in the Henderson household. Pretty quiet. I did a lot of reading. And I'm actually going to share something with you that I read here. And it's a Bible verse in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10. And it says, for we are his creation, or we are God's creation, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared ahead of time so that we should walk in them. Another version talks about how we are his workmanship or his masterpiece or a work of art. And here's the thing, fam, that wasn't my first time ever hearing that. But for some reason, this time, reading it aloud and hearing it, it meant something different to me. You see, my supervisor from my time with FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, anytime we would go to a school, he would always point to that verse as something that helped him. And what I didn't realize is that when he would read that verse, it was actually planting a seed in me. By this time, this seed began to really take root and it began to produce fruit. All of a sudden, I'm realizing that, hey, I'm God's masterpiece. I'm his workmanship. I'm his creation. Yes, my life has value. My life has purpose. My life has meaning. So no matter what anybody says to me or about me, whether it's good or bad, if it's good, it's not going to lead to me being prideful because I have this deeper understanding of who I am and whose I am. Who does God say that I am? And God sees me as his creation and as his masterpiece. So if you're saying good things about me, man, I appreciate it, but I already know who I am because I belong to God. And if you're saying bad things about me or bad things toward me, it's not going to have as much of an impact because I know who I am and whose I am. And if we find ourselves getting into a disagreement, I'm able to act in a way that's more healthy and we can talk about it rather than me acting out because I have a better understanding of who I am. But here's the thing, fam. Even though I had this revelation around this time, what my family needed to see was consistency. You see, one thing that I've learned over the years and even through this situation is simply this. Revelation is good, but consistency is better. Revelation is good, fam, but consistency is better. My family needed to see me be consistent, consistently peaceful, consistently having a good grasp or a good handle on my emotions. If things aren't going well, my wife needs to know that her husband can handle it. My children need to know that my daddy is going to be a source of peace in our home. And by the grace of God and with the help of accountability, fam, I'm blessed and I'm honored and I'm glad to say that my family now lives a peaceful life. And I can lead my sons from my testimony of overcoming. You know, sometimes I'll talk with my older son and you know, he'll tell me he remembers these things. And then I can say, you know, does daddy act that way anymore? And he'll say, no, you don't. Fam, he'll say, no, you don't. He's seen me as a living witness of what it looks like to overcome, specifically for him, overcome rage, because his dad doesn't act that way anymore. As we wrap up today, I want to leave you with these thoughts. Your life has purpose and your life has value. Your life has always had purpose and your life has always had value. If you're dealing with something tough right now, or if you're dealing with bouts of suicide or fits of rage, because I know I'm not the only one, fam. I know I'm not the only one. Just know that you are not alone. You are not alone, and you are not the only one who has dealt with this struggle. And the last thing would just be don't be afraid to talk about it. Don't be afraid to talk about it. Talk about it with the right people. For me, it was my mom when I was dealing with the suicide, and she really helped me with it. And then when it came to rage, I had my friend and I had my pastor who helped me to work through these things. These were real things, fam, that I dealt with in my life. And I'm not proud of it, but the reality is in life we go through certain things. But the challenge is those situations, those struggles, they can end up having us, or we can learn how to overcome and how to deal with them in a healthy manner. So fam, as always, remember, we are in this together. We have this community that once again, that I've invited you to join. I've invited you to join. And fam, as always, remember, we are in this together. I want to continue to walk with you as we learn together, as we grow together, and as we continue to get better one day at a time. You got this.